Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. We're on the Book Summary Podcast, and today we're going to be talking about Factfulness.
Oh, yeah, by Hans Rosling.
Yeah, have you heard of it?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So this book has been, I don't know, like making waves, and
Mm.
if you're interested in a book that kind of like challenges how you see the world and actually leaves you feeling hopeful about the future,
Yeah.
then hit that subscribe button because this is the book for you.
Yeah, this is a book that, stays with you
Oh, yeah.
long after you've read it. It's packed with so many, insights and real-life stories and compelling data that just makes you question, everything you thought you knew about the world.
It's not just some like dry academic book either.
No, no.
Rosman was like a really good storyteller. He could like weave together data and personal stories and even humor to make even the most complex topics like fun and accessible.
Totally.
Did you know he used to swallow swords?
Yeah, I love that about him.
Yeah.
He was not afraid to just shock his audience to get them to pay attention to what he was saying. Yeah, and I think it's a great metaphor for the book itself. You take this thing that seems scary and dangerous, and then you show people that it's not what they thought.
Right. I love that. So we have a sword-swallowing, data-loving doctor who dedicated his life to understanding global health and dispelling myths about the world.
I know.
What is the core message of Factfulness?
So at its heart, Factfulness argues that the world is actually much better than we think it is.
Yeah.
And so Rosling presents all this data to show that we've made incredible progress in poverty reduction, life expectancy, child mortality, all these huge markers. But he says that our instincts prevent us from seeing this progress.
So we're stuck with this like skewed view of reality.
Yes.
That's shaped by all of our biases and all these outdated assumptions.
Yeah, exactly. He calls them mega misconceptions.
Ooh, I like that.
That distort how we see the world, and then they lead us to make a rational decision.
Oh, wow.
And they're hardwired into our brains, but by becoming aware of them, we can start to override them.
Oh, that's interesting.
And make more informed decisions.
10 instincts. That's a lot.
I know, it's a big list.
What's the first one?
Okay, so the first one is the gap instinct.
Okay.
This is our tendency to divide the world into two distinct groups. You see this all the time, developed versus developing.
Right. Yeah.
And assume that this huge gap exists between them.
I see this all the time in the news and even political rhetoric.
Yeah, yeah.
It's always this narrative of us versus them, the haves and the have-nots.
Exactly. It's this binary view that's super dangerous because it's an oversimplification. And it just ignores all the diversity of human experience and also all the progress that's been made in so many parts of the world.
So how does Rosling challenge this gap instinct?
He dismantles the categories that we use to define developed versus developing in the first place.
Okay.
And he presents data to show that most countries just don't fit neatly into these categories. There's actually a huge spectrum of development, and a lot of countries are clustered somewhere in the middle.
So it's not this clear-cut divide.
No.
It's more of a continuum.
Yeah, more of a spectrum. He tells this great story about how he was talking with a journalist.
Yeah.
And she really wanted to use these simple labels. And so he showed her this chart that was comparing babies per woman and lifespan across different countries.
Okay.
And he was expecting, that the data was going to divide the world into these two clusters, developed and developing. But that's not what happened at all. Instead, it showed this gradual spread of countries with most of them kind of clustered in the middle.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and it was this really powerful, visual demonstration of just how much progress has been made globally and how these categories are just totally outdated.
The gap instinct simplifies things too much.
It does.
What does he propose as an alternative?
He proposes the concept of 4 income levels.
Okay.
Which is just a much more nuanced and accurate way of understanding global development.
So it's not just rich and poor.
No, no, no.
It's more of a spectrum.
It's a spectrum that reflects the different stages of progress that are happening all around the world.
Yeah, I'm liking this already. It's about seeing the world in shades of gray, not just black and white.
Totally.
So what are the 4 levels?
Okay, so level 1 is the poorest level. And this represents about 1 billion people who are living on less than $2 a day. And these people often have to walk for hours to fetch water. They cook over open fires. They have no electricity.
Wow.
Life at that level is a constant struggle for survival.
Yeah, that's really hard to even imagine.
Level 2 is where we start to see some improvements.
Okay.
So people at this level are earning between $2 and $8 per day.
Hmm.
And they might own a bicycle, they might have some basic electrical appliances, and they can afford like a slightly more diverse diet.
So things are starting to look up at level 2,
Yeah.
but there's still a long way to go.
Yeah.
What about level 3?
Level 3 is a daily income of $8 to $32. And this is where we see like even more progress. Families at this level might own a motorcycle or have a refrigerator. They can maybe send their children to school. Life is significantly different from those first two levels.
Yeah, it's amazing how much of a difference just a little bit more income makes on people's lives.
Totally.
What about level 4?
Level 4 is where most people in high-income countries live
Okay.
with daily incomes above $32.
Hmm.
And, they have access to cars, modern appliances, higher education, a wide range of opportunities.
Right, right. So the key takeaway here is that while these income differences do exist, the world is not neatly divided.
No.
It's more of this spectrum with these like gradual transitions and lots of overlap.
Exactly.
And so this framework really helps us move beyond those like simplistic us versus them narratives.
Yes, and that's just the first of the 10 instincts that Rosling unpacks.
I know this book is packed with so many insights
Yeah.
that will like truly make you rethink everything you thought you knew about the world.
I think so too.
I'm already hooked. And if you're loving this too, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the Book Summary Podcast so you don't miss out on the rest of this deep dive. We'll be back soon to explore the next instinct on Rosling's list.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Factfulness here on the Book Summary Podcast.
Yes.
If you're just joining us, be sure to check out Part 1, where we explore the first of Rosling's 10 instincts. The gap instinct.
Yeah, right.
Are you ready to, like, shatter some more misconceptions about the world? Hit that like button and let's get to it.
Let's do it. I'm so excited for this one.
All right. What's the next instinct that Rosling tackles?
So the next one is the negativity instinct, which is all about our tendency to just focus on the negative and just believe that the world is getting worse, even when the data shows that it's not.
Oh, this is so relatable, right?
Yeah.
It's like we're constantly being bombarded by all this bad news,
Totally.
wars, famines, natural disasters, all these political scandals. It's
Yeah.
so easy to feel like the world is like going downhill.
It's understandable, though, you know?
Yeah.
It's like our brains are wired to, like, pay attention to threats and danger because that's how our ancestors survived.
Right.
But, like, in today's world, this negativity bias can really distort our perception of reality.
So how does Rosling help us overcome this instinct?
He starts by just acknowledging that bad things do happen.
Right.
He's not denying the existence of suffering or injustice,
Okay.
but he argues that we need to balance our awareness of the negative with a recognition of the progress that's being made.
So it's not about ignoring the problems.
No.
It's about having a more like balanced and accurate view.
Right. He actually uses this great analogy to illustrate this point. Imagine a bathtub filled with water, and that represents all the bad things in the world. And the water level is high, so it's like easy to just focus on that and feel overwhelmed.
Right.
But if we like look a little bit closer, we can see that there's also a tap running.
Yep.
And that tap is slowly filling the tub with fresh, clean water, representing all the positive developments.
I love that. It's like we're focusing so much on the level of the water, but we're forgetting to see the inflow of positive change.
Exactly. And Rosling, he shows us all this data that the tap really is running. He highlights the dramatic decline in child mortality, the increase in life expectancy, the reduction of extreme poverty, like all these positive trends that are so often overlooked because we're just so focused on the negative.
It's like we're so focused on that overflowing bathtub that we forget to notice that there's a plumber working to fix the leak.
Right.
So how do we train ourselves to see the tap or the positive developments instead of just fixating on the overflowing bathtub?
So Rosling has a couple of suggestions.
Yeah.
First, be aware of that negativity bias. Your brain is naturally drawn to negative information.
Right.
So make a conscious effort to also seek out positive news.
So instead of just reading those headlines that are screaming about like disaster and conflict,
Yeah.
I should actively look for stories that are about progress and innovation.
Yes. And don't just rely on your gut feeling or what you see on social media.
Right.
Check the data. Look at those long-term trends,
Yeah.
not just the latest sensational story.
That's such great advice.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in the emotional roller coaster of like the news cycle.
Totally.
But by taking a step back and actually looking at the data,
Yeah.
I can get a more grounded and accurate perspective.
Exactly. And remember, recognizing progress doesn't mean you're ignoring the problems that still exist. It's about having a balanced view, acknowledging the positive and the negative.
So it's not about being naive or like overly optimistic.
No, no, no.
It's about being like realistic
Yeah.
and informed.
Yeah, informed. And that leads us perfectly to the next instinct,
Oh, what's that?
the straight line instinct.
Ooh, okay.
So this is our tendency to just assume that trends will continue in this straight line,
Okay.
even though the real world is full of curves and bumps and all these unexpected turns.
I can see how that would lead to some like really inaccurate predictions.
Yeah. It happens all the time, you know?
Yeah.
We see a trend going in a certain direction and we just assume it's going to continue on that path forever.
Right.
But Rosling shows that most trends just don't follow a straight line.
So how can we avoid falling into this trap?
So he encourages us to just be aware of all the different shapes that trends can take.
Okay.
So he talks about like S-bend,
What?
where the trend starts slowly, it accelerates rapidly, and then it flattens out. He talks about slides, where there is a steep decline followed by stabilization, and then humps, where the trend experiences a temporary increase or decrease before returning to like a previous level.
I love those visualizations, you know?
Yeah, me too.
It's like having a toolkit for understanding all the different ways that trends can unfold.
Exactly. And by recognizing these patterns, we can avoid making these like simplistic predictions, and we can be more prepared for all those unexpected twists and turns that just inevitably happen.
This is all so insightful. I'm starting to see how all these instincts can really cloud our judgment and lead us to make irrational decisions.
It's true.
But with Rosling's guidance, we can actually start to identify those biases
Yeah.
and think more clearly about the world.
That's the power of factfulness. It's like a mental detox.
Yeah.
It clears away all those misconceptions and then reveals this more accurate and hopeful picture of reality.
I love it. And if you're loving it too, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join the Book Summary Podcast community.
Yes.
We've got so much more to explore in Factfulness, so stay tuned for part 3, where we dive into the next 3 instincts on Rosling's list. Welcome back to the Book Summary Podcast and our epic deep dive into Factfulness. We've already tackled 2 of Rosling's 10 instincts, the gap instinct and the negativity instinct. And now we're ready for more. If you're just joining us, be sure to check out parts 1 and 2 to get the full picture.
Yeah, definitely.
And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of our insightful book summaries.
We would love to have you as part of the community.
All right, let's jump right into the next instinct on Rosling's list.
Okay, so we talk about how our brains tend to oversimplify and focus on the negative. Now let's talk about how we often misjudge the importance of things based just on their size. This is the size instinct.
So like we might see a single event like a natural disaster or a terrorist attack and assume that it's like way more significant than something that's like a slower, less visible trend.
Yeah.
Like the decline of poverty.
Exactly. Our brains are just wired to pay attention to things that are big and dramatic. It's like a survival mechanism.
Right.
But it can lead us to make bad decisions, especially in today's world.
Can you give me an example of how this instinct like plays out in real life?
Think about how we allocate resources.
Okay.
Often we're drawn to the most visible and emotionally charged problems,
Right.
even if they're not the most pressing. And Rosling gives this great example from his own experience as a young doctor in Mozambique.
Tell me more.
So he was working in this hospital that was constantly struggling with like limited resources. And he initially like focused all his attention on treating patients with these like dramatic illnesses, the kind of cases that would make headlines.
So he was drawn to the most visible and emotionally impactful cases.
Right.
What happened?
But he soon realized that this approach wasn't actually the most effective. Because while those individual cases were really important, the majority of the deaths were actually caused by preventable diseases like diarrhea and pneumonia.
Oh, wow.
And those were less dramatic, but far more prevalent and affecting like a much larger portion of the population.
That's a powerful realization, you know.
I know.
It highlights how focusing on like the most visible problems can actually blind us to the bigger picture.
It's true. And to combat this, Rosling introduces the 80-20 rule.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Have you?
Yeah, it's the idea that 80% of the effects come from like 20% of the causes.
Yeah, exactly. So by identifying that 20% of causes that are having the biggest impact, we can focus our efforts much more effectively. Instead of trying to tackle every problem at once, we can prioritize the ones that'll make the biggest difference.
That's a great strategy, like for both personal and global problem solving.
Yeah.
Now, what's the next instinct?
The next one is the generalization instinct.
Okay.
This is our tendency to categorize and generalize. which
Right.
can be really helpful in a lot of situations.
Mm.
But it can also lead to like dangerous stereotypes
Yeah.
and inaccurate assumptions about people and cultures.
Oh, I think we're all guilty of this.
I know, totally.
It's so easy to just assume that everyone in a particular group is the same.
It's a natural human tendency, but
Yeah.
Rosling wants us to be more critical of these generalizations and
Mhm.
recognize that there's just so much diversity within any group.
So how do we avoid falling into this trap?
So he has a couple suggestions. First, he says look for differences within groups. So instead of assuming that everyone in a certain country or religion is the same,
Okay.
we should recognize the huge range of experiences and perspectives within those groups.
It's about embracing nuance and complexity.
Exactly. He also encourages us to look for similarities across groups.
Okay.
We might find common ground between people from different countries or religions or income levels that challenge our preconceived notions.
So it's about recognizing our shared humanity and the things that connect us rather than focusing on what divides us.
Exactly. And finally, Rosling urges us to just be really aware of exceptional examples.
What does that mean?
So a single vivid story or anecdote can be very persuasive, right? But it might not actually be representative of the whole.
So just because I hear a story about one person from a particular country doing something extraordinary,
Yeah,
that doesn't mean that everyone from that country is, like, capable of the same thing.
right, exactly. Rosling wants us to be critical of these exceptional examples
Okay.
and look for broader trends and patterns.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
It's so easy to be, like, swayed by a compelling story.
Totally.
But I need to remember that it might not be the whole story.
Yeah.
Now, let's move on to the next instinct on Rosling's list.
Okay, so the seventh instinct is the destiny instinct.
Hmm.
This is our tendency to believe that certain groups are just destined for a particular fate,
Okay.
whether it's poverty or conflict or just a lack of progress.
So we fall into this trap of thinking that things will never change.
Yeah, that certain cultures or countries are just stuck in a particular way of life, and this can lead to a sense of hopelessness and inaction.
Right.
You know, why bother trying to help if things are just going to stay the same anyway?
But Rosling challenges this belief, right?
Oh, he absolutely does.
Okay.
He argues that cultures aren't static. They evolve and adapt over time.
Hmm.
And he provides all this data to show that progress is possible even in places that were once considered hopeless.
So it's a reminder that change is possible, that we shouldn't give up on certain groups or countries just because they're facing these huge challenges.
Exactly. Rosling also wants us to be aware of these gradual changes, these incremental shifts that might not make headlines, but can lead to significant progress over time.
It's about recognizing that change is a process, not an event.
Right.
What's the eighth instinct?
The eighth instinct is the single perspective instinct,
Right.
which is our tendency to just rely on a single lens
Okay.
or worldview to understand the world.
So we get stuck in our own, ideological bubbles
Yes.
and only listen to people who agree with us and
Right.
dismiss anything that challenges our views.
Or we rely too heavily on experts in one field,
Yeah.
even when dealing with complex problems that really require a multidisciplinary approach.
So how do we overcome this instinct?
So Rosling encourages us to seek out diverse perspectives and challenge our own biases.
Okay.
He reminds us that nobody has a monopoly on the truth and that we can learn from people who have totally different experiences and viewpoints.
It's about being open-minded and curious,
Totally.
constantly questioning my own assumptions
Yeah.
and seeking out new information.
Yeah.
What a great message. Okay, let's move on to the ninth instinct.
Okay, the ninth instinct is the blame instinct,
Okay.
which is our tendency to look for someone. Exactly. And he encourages us to ask different questions like,
Yeah.
what are the incentives that are driving this behavior?
Right.
Or what are the structures that are enabling this problem to persist?
That's a powerful shift in perspective. Yeah.
No, it's amazing.
By understanding those systems at play, I can start to develop more effective solutions.
That's the goal.
And now for the final instinct. What is it?
Okay, so the 10th and final instinct is the urgency instinct,
Okay.
which is our tendency to feel all this pressure to act immediately, often without even taking the time to think things through.
Oh, this one is so relatable, especially in our fast-paced world, right?
I know.
It's like I'm constantly being bombarded with messages urging me to do something now, to take action before it's too late.
It's a really powerful instinct, but
Yeah.
it can lead to rash decisions and unintended consequences.
So how do we avoid falling prey to this instinct?
So Rosling encourages us to just take a breath and resist that urge to act so impulsively. He reminds us that most things just aren't as urgent as they might seem,
Hmm.
and that taking the time to actually think things through can lead to much better outcomes.
So it's about pausing, gathering all the information, and developing like a well-informed plan of action
Right.
rather than just reacting to like the latest crisis.
Exactly. And he emphasizes asking critical questions like,
Yeah.
what are the facts?
Hmm.
What are the potential solutions?
Hmm.
And what are all the unintended consequences that might happen if I act too quickly?
That's great advice. It's about being thoughtful and strategic,
Yeah,
not just reactive.
totally.
Wow, it has been such a journey
Yeah, I know.
exploring these 10 instincts with you.
I feel like my brain has just been stretched.
Factfulness is such a powerful
Yeah,
and thought-provoking book.
it really is.
It's challenged a lot of my assumptions,
Mm,
expanded my worldview,
yeah.
and given me like a renewed sense of hope for the future.
Me too. I
Yeah.
honestly think that everyone should read this book.
I completely agree. And if you're feeling inspired to dive into Factfulness yourself, we've got a link in the description where you can pick up a copy. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our community here on the Book Summary Podcast for more deep dives into books that will challenge your thinking and expand your horizons.
Yes, please do. We would love to have you.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay factful.